Today on Keep Classical Weird, the third in our series of Not Dead Composers, featuring a composer and multi-instrumentalist who, as you'll hear, has some fantastic adjectives to describe the instruments he uses. I loved how you described the instrument itself as aggressive and grungy. I think those are great adjectives for an instrument and how it affects you and how it hits your ears. That's fantastic.
You know what? That might just be how I play it as well. It might just be because I enjoy playing it quite aggressively.
Welcome, friends, to episode 29 of Keep Classical Weird. I am your host, Casey Bozell, and today we're talking with London-based and Emmy-nominated composer Rael Jones. In addition to being a lovely person, Rael makes composition seem completely natural. He's mainly known for his work in TV and film, having composed the score to feature films Suite Française and My Cousin Rachel, and has an ongoing gig as the composer for the TV show Harlots on Hulu. After doing a little bit of clock calculation to account for the time difference between London and Portland, he and I had a really fun chat. In addition to his credits as a TV and film composer, Rael has just released an album for piano quintet entitled Mother Echo, which is available to purchase at raeljones.bandcamp.com. Take a listen to the opening track, Ascension Bells, then enjoy our conversation that follows. I've been asking people their name and I guess how you identify yourself in the world of music.
I'm Rael Jones. I'm a composer and multi-instrumentalist. I'm probably most well known for film and TV music, writing for media. But I'm in bands. I also write music for its own sake. And just frankly, do anything anybody asks. If anybody asks me to do something, I'll probably just say yes.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's me.
And what's your educational background and training?
I learned piano from the age of 6, classical piano, and then I sort of was lucky enough to have electric guitar and drum kit at home as well. So I taught myself on those and was watching MTV2 and Kurt Cobain and Radiohead and my dad's vinyl collection, Tubular Bells and prog and 70s stuff and Beatles, and so just all that at the same time as doing very classical training, both together at the same time. And by 16, 17, I was in a couple of bands as well as performing in like piano competitions and things like that. Then I went to uni to do quite a technical course in the end, but with music theory in it as well. It's quite unusual. It's called the Tonmeister course in the UK. And basically it's the course to do if you want to end up at Abbey Road Studios or Air Studios, the big studios in the UK, and it's a really great grounding for that. And I wanted to be a music producer. I thought, work with artists. I don't even know what a music producer was. I don't think. Mixing desks are cool, aren't they? And you needed to have in the UK music, maths, and physics A levels at a high grade, specifically those three, which is a bit of an unusual combination. So simply because I was doing those three, I thought, oh, this is the perfect degree for me. It's just continuing my study at school, So that's why I did it. And in the end, I guess I was a bit different to the average person on that course because though I am technical and I have always been into maths and so on, and I approach music from a pattern-based side more than the linguistic side, I think. Despite that, I was always the more kind of composery one on the course. There was composition as part of the degree. You could record your own music in the studios, and I did more of that than I was more interested in doing that than actually where shall I put the microphone and what EQ settings shall I use and what's the best compressor for this kick drum sound. That's what the best people in that course were really into, that stuff, and I just wasn't. So I was more sort of composery really. So it became obvious that I wanted to go in more that direction, but it turned out it was the best degree to do, to then have great contacts in the industry, because so many people from that course go on to work in studios and work near film composers, and film composers often need help. And so when they asked an assistant or asked an engineer, do you know anybody who can help me out, then they'd suggest me quite early on. So that's how I've ended up where I am, to be honest.
Very interesting. That's kind of more of an unusual road than a lot of composers that I've talked to already. It looks like you did something that it looked like you were supposed to do it, and you still ended up there, but it wasn't the most conventional path.
A strange route, and it just very much not planned. It's not the route you would plan to take. Again, I just followed my nose and ended up where I've ended up. I didn't really want to specialize in film and TV music. It's a place to earn money and do music at the same time. I would quite like to have done concert music or something like that, but I needed to live in London and pay rent. So there was no way to do that and just write, obscure instrumental music or whatever I wanted to write at the time.
Right.
That wasn't going to happen. So I did write that music, but I also earned money by working on feature films and in all kinds of roles. Every role you can imagine in the music department, programming and orchestrating and playing instruments and ghostwriting and etc. etc.
Oh my gosh. Wow. There's so many roles there that certainly I don't know about at that part of the industry. I know there's like music department stuff, but there's all of these like subdivisions.
Yeah.
When you said you started classical piano at 6.
That's right.
When along the way was your first inkling that you actually wanted to write things, that you actually wanted to compose things?
That was pretty early as well. Very rarely you get somebody who's really good at both sight reading and has a great ear as well. But most of the time you're one or the other, and I'm very much not the best at sight reading and much better with my ear. So I think if you're like that, you end up making up your own stuff a bit anyway, because you're always transcribing music you hear, and you're always more interested in what is going on behind the music you're reading, and what are the patterns that are going on here. What's the harmony? How does this work? So I guess I from quite a young age I was working out the harmony of the early Haydn or Mozart stuff I was playing, and then I would try and work out pop songs I was hearing on TV over here. And so I guess there was always more of a creativity to my practice than there needed to be, for the standard passing the exams and getting the grades thing. And I wrote little pieces when I was quite young, notated. I don't know why I was inspired to. We had some sheet music, and I was learning other people's music. Maybe I can write some. It was just something I did. I don't know why, to be honest.
That sounds like a really natural progression. It sounded like you just kind of followed what felt good.
Yeah, that was it. And I was just, not, especially as I got more into my teenage years, I was just really awkward. I was very antisocial. I had all kinds of weird problems, and I just, didn't have any friends. So I just spent my whole time writing music and, listening to music, and I had the different outlets because I had the drums and the guitar and the piano, and I just cycled around the three of them. So I just kept creating, and I had a little mini disc 4-track recorder, and so I guess that got me into what was going to become my degree, but a really basic version of it. Learning how to record my drums with 2 rubbish mics either side of the room, which sounded terrible, and this kind of thing. Just experimenting with recording as well quite early on. Also, I was quite lucky. The school I went to had these music labs with really early version of Cubase on it, and terrible general MIDI sound module things. And again, rather than having to socialize with people in the playground or do any sports, at break times and lunch times, I would just be in there on my own making crazy 20-minute long MIDI compositions, and so I was doing electronic music of a sort at the same time as well. So I just kind of did it did every possible music avenue that was open to me at the time. I didn't really see a distinction. It's just what I did.
That's really cool. That's very neat. And it seems to, I mean, it looks like you kind of built a career upon just keeping on doing that.
Well, that's
doing
it.
Kind of everything.
I'm just the same kid doing the same thing. I mean, there's no plan. Yeah, it's just fun to make music. And at a certain point, grown-up things happen. You have to earn some money as well. So I've just worked out ways of doing that. I've just figured it out. That's
fantastic. That's so good. You describe yourself. You're self-described as a multi-instrumentalist, and
yes.
you know, obviously, you talked a little bit about that. You had from early on, you had the piano and the drums, and so I guess it's a two-part question I have. What kind of instruments do you most like to play, and what kind of instruments do you most like to compose for? And is that, is that the same question? Do they overlap?
Yes, well, I tend to write at an instrument most of the time. Not always. It's very genre dependent. Certainly if I was doing what I would call classical music, I'd be writing at a piano, almost certainly, or very occasionally a guitar. But then a lot of the film and TV stuff I do, I might be writing at a more obscure instrument. I might start a piece with a hang drum or a weird Scandinavian bowed folk instrument or a hurdy-gurdy, or base it around the limitations of that instrument, because it might be certain instruments you can only play certain notes, or the way they articulate is sort of, it's preferential to play certain things. It forces you to write certain kinds of notes potentially. But especially with film and TV stuff, I write at loads of instruments, different instruments. But then if I was doing more electronic genres, you don't even start with an instrument at all. You start with the sound of a gate closing, and then you stretch it by a factor of 100, and then you filter it, and then you etc. Whatever. I've never done that specific thing, but something of that sort. It's a sonic thing, and I'm less drawn to do that kind of music on the whole. But I do it as part of my job for sure.
So would you say you're more drawn to more of the classical type of compositions, or?
I love doing classical. I just like real instruments, fundamentally. That's my favorite thing. I don't get as excited by synthesizers as some people do. I use them, and I have some excitement for them, but not as much as I have for real instruments. It's just how I am.
I was looking at your Twitter feed, I think just yesterday, and I saw a really great video that you posted of like what I do at work, and it's you just bouncing around, and trying different instruments of all types. And at one point, I think you're on a swing set and you're playing nickel harpa.
That's right, yeah.
I thought that was so cool. I've just been introduced to the nickel harpa myself in the past few years, and I think that's such a cool instrument. But you're right, there's certain, I guess you'd call them limitations, but it's a very specific instrument in terms of how you play it and what you do.
It's hugely so.
Have you composed for that?
Yeah, loads. Nickel harper and octave harper more recently as well, which is the cello version, which is quite rare. There's not that many. I believe there's only 3 in the UK, at least last time I spoke to the lady that knew anything about octave harpers. So I got the 3rd one.
Nice.
Yeah, especially the TV series Harlots, that has a lot of nickel harper and octave harper in it.
Okay.
It's because it sounds period, but it's also quite aggressive and grungy, so it kind of fitted with that story in particular, where we were trying. It's set in 1763, but the story we wanted to tell was more edgy, and it wasn't a period drama in the usual sense. So those instruments really suited it. Just technically, the instruments suit me because bowed stringed instruments are fantastic, but you have to really practice from being quite small to play a violin in tune. If I tried to pick up a violin at my age now, I wouldn't get very far in any sensible time frame. So what's great is with a nickel harper and octave harper, it's keyed, right? So you can suddenly, and it feels like a guitar-ish. It has some of the muscle memory of a guitar chimes with that, so I can kind of adapt to skills I already have, and then I can just concentrate on my right hand bowing in whatever way I want to. So it's just taking advantage of the skills I already have a bit more. And also it's just different. If I want a cello and a violin, I'll get someone else to play it, like my wife, who's a great violinist, for example. But it's also good for me to write out an instrument. I mean, potentially, if I'm writing a a violin part or a viola part, I might write it on a nickel harper just to get get ideas for how it might do string crossing or voicing, say, just because it's something I can quickly play myself, or sometimes on a mandolin or this kind of thing. So I use real instruments sometimes just as a writing aid.
Do you find the instruments themselves, you must have a lot of different inspiration when you start composing? Some composers have described like just deadlines as their inspiration.
That's a good one.
Let's create a scenario of, you are just going to compose a piece just for yourself, not for anyone else. You just want to, where is that inspiration most likely to come from for you?
Probably playing at an instrument, and I won't be thinking about it too much. It'll just come, and I can't tell you why or what. It's my brain somehow recombining all the stuff I've ever heard into a new thing. I mean, that's what composition is, right? But that's all that's happening. If I'm doing it for myself, especially if I'm doing it for film, my foremost thought is, what isn't this? I chop out the things it's not first. You could do it very basically. Okay, is this a major or minor key? And then more than that, maybe this is a major key, but it's going to have a flat seventh and occasionally a flat second. It's a bit more kind of edgy and mysterious in some way, or you sort of hone in on what the harmony is, or the mode potentially, and you sort of keep chopping out what it isn't. Okay, what instruments could it be? What instruments is it definitely not? And I find it's just a process of refining the space I'm allowed to operate in, And if it's my own music, that space is bigger because I'm free to do what I want. But still, I impose restrictions on myself. I'm quite drawn to using limited resources musically. I had this piano teacher at university, and it got to the point where, because my sight reading's less good, but I was, especially at that time, a good piano player, and I was learning hard Rachmaninoff and Debussy stuff. But it took me quite a while to learn any one piece because it's just lots of notes, right? And it would take quite a while, and I got more and more into improvisation, and I started to improvise in concert. And my piano teacher was getting more exasperated with me. I said, okay, then just play an improvisation for me for 3 minutes, and I'll teach you improvisation. So I did that, and he said, okay, that's nice, but I want you to do another improvisation, but this time you can only use 3 fingers of your left hand.
Oh.
And basically that, in a nutshell, is a huge part of what I do. It's okay, I'm chopping out what it's not. The limitations suddenly reveal something quite different than new, because I'm not just relying on, in that case, muscle memory to do the same thing I always do. I can just do that same pattern of noodly quick notes. You can limit yourself from doing that and stop yourself repeating, I guess, what you always do. So I think that process generally is something I bring to composition in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's okay, I've written this very simple harmonic progression. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try and make this harmonic progression last for the 5 minutes of the whole piece without ever changing it. And I'm going to do everything I can to keep the interest going. I'm going to change the bass notes but keep the fundamental harmony above it the same. I'm going to try and add any extra harmony notes I can to that harmony without it collapsing, but fundamentally I'm going to keep that going throughout. I do a lot of that kind of thing where I have a limiting factor, often of a repeating figure, this kind of thing. I've been quite into that recently.
That's an interesting way to direct yourself into something. It's, from my perspective, I'm a performer. And in my mind, composition magically is creating something out of nothing, because that's not where my brain goes, right? So when I hear, that there's all this process, and that you actually, either there's restrictions imposed upon you, or you actually impose those restrictions upon yourself, that makes it seem like such like a linear and such an organic process. That way, it makes it seem like it's so natural.
Yeah, well, it kind of is. You can often just start. So I just thought of this. What I was just describing was a piece pieces that I start from a very small idea. Mm-hmm. So the first track on the album, I think we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted something to evoke bells, like descending bells. So that was my limitation. that's the whole piece is that.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, what can I do with that? And eventually, so you keep the same idea going, but explore all the possibilities around it. Add extra string lines, this kind of thing. So I love that compositional technique where there's the simplest idea, but it explodes from a very small, humble origin,
But you're keeping the thread. You're keeping the same thread.
Exactly.
Throughout. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. If possible. If it gets boring, then I just do a B section. Or a C section. Or just do loads of sections. But recently I've been quite into this technique. It's just something that I find very satisfying if you can make it work. But you have to really find the right idea, because if you repeat a boring idea, it really gets boring. So that's the key to it.
Well, that's interesting though, because if you just played that one descending scale, there's interest and intrigue with it and color, but it doesn't on the surface seem like it would be an idea that would flourish like you made it flourish, because it's a descending scale.
Yeah, well, the key to it really is the polyrhythmic aspect to it. So the fact it's knitted into, it's already a semiquaver behind the beat. Yeah, so there's just a couple. In fact, there's three rhythmic layers going on at once. So it just sort of is knitted together, and it has the nice effect, I think, that particular pattern. It makes it sound more like bells in the distance, because it creates, even though it's just a descending figure, it makes it sound more like it's echoing around a town or this kind of thing, because it's got the rippling echo effects. Yeah,
that's very cool.
So that it just somehow evoked what I wanted it to evoke quite nicely.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for going through that. That's really cool to have that kind of breakdown. I would imagine that your process for something like that you're composing for yourself, or like for this album that you released, versus scoring for TV or film, I would imagine that process of figuring that out, how does that differ? How does that stay the same?
Yeah, it's tricky. It depends. The big difference with film and TV is probably just the realities of the point of the process you start is a big one. Ideally, and to be honest, more as I go through my career, this is happening more. The ideal way is you get involved really early. The script is the only thing you've got, and they've not even shot yet, and you write some themes and so on. And I'm doing a film of this kind at the moment. I've written themes, and it's being shot in Budapest right now, and they're dancing on set to music I've written, this kind of thing. So that's brilliant, because then it is very similar to writing an album, and I just know in 6 months I'm going to be adapting my music and tweaking it, but the fundamental ideas are just pure music, if you like. It's just inspired by a script. But also what happens a lot in my job is, okay, so we've basically finished editing the picture, and the composer we wanted it's not available, or they've done a rubbish job and we fired them, or we've totally changed the musical direction, and we wanted it to originally be dubstep bagpipes, but now we want it to be classical, or whatever. That happens a surprising amount. So in that case, it's just a different job. You've already got your limitations, because they know they've probably put other people's soundtracks on it as a temporary guide, temp music, which people often talk about. So you need to fit in with what they already want, the vision that the director and producers already have. So that becomes more the limiting factor than the limitations I have been talking about hitherto. There's the other limitation you have, where you don't just have one decision maker, which can happen a lot, where you have a director who wants the dubstep bagpipes for some reason. Don't know why that's my example. And the producers want something very different. And then your limitation is, okay, I need to somehow please both those parties, or work out the politics whereby I get to the end of this job without being kicked off it, and this kind of thing. So that, frankly, that becomes the primary driving force, which isn't ideal.
It sounds like collaboration under duress, almost.
Yeah, but it's not uncommon. And the bigger the project, the more it gets like that. The bigger if it's a big feature film, if it's a director who isn't themselves that big compared to the production, that's a key problem, because then the director doesn't have as much power in the context of the producers and the money that's been put in and so on. So that can happen very often. It's a totally sort of right angles issue to what we're talking about, but it's a big reality in this industry,
Yeah, the politics behind it.
The politics and the money and all this stuff, and it's not something I love about the job, but I've got better at dealing with it. It's just another aspect to it.
You can make this answer as broad as you'd like. What is your favorite thing you've ever composed?
That's tricky. I'm not sure. I'm happy with lots of bits, and it almost depends what day you ask me on. I always come back to the music I wrote for Suite Française, the main love theme for that. I really like. You just sometimes you get it right, and I feel like I got that one right somehow. I don't know why.
Oh, nice.
I remember it wasn't the first love theme I wrote, or more to the point, the first love theme I wrote became the B section for that Suite Française tune. In fact, I could play it to you if you want. I didn't intend to play much, but I can do.
Oh, I would love that, yeah.
So it was, the B section as it ended up is more like... this kind of thing. It sounds more like a B section than it originally did, because I've made the harmony more unresolved. But we just decided it needed a much more strong theme that would work in a really simple way. And I had the idea of making it more sort of slightly nationalist, the sort of national anthem vibe, French national anthems, and having the French overture rhythm as well. And ended up with a kind of... this kind of thing. And it's not massively complicated, but when it's orchestrated up, which obviously it is in the film, it's just a satisfying theme. It just works for me still after all these years. And anything that I've written 6 or 7 years ago in that case and still like, that's the sign, really, because you tend to like the thing you've written yesterday, hopefully, but do you still like it a year later or 5 years later, or if you come back to it, do you hear shortcomings, this kind of thing. And I think all composers hear shortcomings almost all the time, and it's rare that you don't. And
so
that's one why I don't.
You've got a shelf life on your compositions, you feel?
Yeah. Yes. Or maybe even though at the time you're suspicious at the time, but you kind of lie to yourself that it's the best thing ever, or that it's working perfectly, or you're just enthusiastic because it's new. But when you put it into a wider context, when you come back to it more like with a punter's ears, you come to it with fresh ears, then... yeah, maybe it doesn't sound quite as great as you thought. That happens to all of us all the time, I think.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess that parallels to most any musician, kind of no matter what track you take. We're always trying to go for like the next level. So,
well, I was going to say recordings of performances for performing musicians. Maybe a lot of performers find a similar thing. They hear recordings that they thought, oh, that was a great concert, and then they hear it back and just... oh, maybe that wasn't quite as good as I thought. But then occasionally there'll be one that really did just work, and it really was as spine-tingling as you thought. And it's just...
right.
There's a big difference between thinking it's great at the time and thinking it's great later, is my point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm connecting with now, because I've had that experience of like, oh, okay, so that... now I don't get to think of that one concert in the idealistic way that that I had in my head because I just heard the recording.
That's the tyranny of recordings. I mean, in a way, it's nice to imagine it was great. I mean, I've almost intentionally destroyed some of the music I wrote when I was much younger, because I knew that, okay, as I get older, I'm going to know this is like embarrassingly terrible. and there's no point me keeping this, you know.
Really?
Because early on you're just messing around with basic chords and stuff, and you're just working out how music works in the most basic way, and there's no need to have a document of it, you know. I was no like Mozart or Mendelssohn writing masterworks at that age. You know, just we don't need to keep that stuff. So yeah,
That means when your cataloger comes along later, they're going to be very confused about what Opus 1 was for you.
Well, Opus 1 is in the bin, I tell you. Opus 50 is in the bin.
You've built up a really cool career of a lot of different things. I was just looking at your IMDb page, and I'm like, you did some of this too, and you did some of it like in various roles, and you've been nominated for 3 Emmys. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now you've got the new. Has it been released yet? Has Mother Echo officially been released?
It's actually out in 2 days from now.
In 2 days. Okay.
Yeah, Tuesday. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so could we talk about that album a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I should say the reason it's 2 days away, it's a totally arbitrary date, were it not for the fact it's the 5-year anniversary of my mum dying, which is the whole thing the album as it ended up being. It was sort of, she died 17th November 5 years ago, and I just, because I've already sort of hinted at, my job isn't always dead easy. It can be hard pleasing people. It's the kind of job where if you're in a maybe more fragile emotional state, you don't want to be necessarily doing certain parts of it. So I was lucky enough that I could take a few months off just after my mum died, which was useful anyway, because there's loads to sort out normally, and there was in her case. So in that period, having said no to a couple of normal work things, I just wrote sketches at the piano as, frankly, just a form of therapy, just something to do that was a bit of a release to think about something else. As I guess I've always done. I've always written music as a self-soothing thing, or played instruments as a self-soothing thing, you know, being the lonely kid going between the instruments at home. So I was just doing the same thing I've always done. And then 2 or 3 months later, got back into work again. But I basically had the album at that point in the fragments. I had, you know, the bells and that I just played you earlier, and had all those piano sketches, mainly, often with a tune on top. And then I think later I decided it was definitely going to be string quartet and piano, the whole thing. And by then, just in the background of my mind, I thought, okay, this is going to be an album, isn't it? And this is the theme. This is what it's about. So yes, it was never, as so much of my life has been, it was an accident. I just wrote some stuff and then realized it was going to be an album later, and have fitted it into the gaps with my normal job. And it's been a great process to do, to be honest, because normally I don't spend 5 years over anything. And it's been good to come back to something where I'm not working within the same kind of limitations that I have in my job sometimes, where I am having to write dubstep that is also bagpipe music at the same time, or whatever it is that I'm doing. That's just become the example in this particular interview. But yes, my job is ridiculous sometimes like that. So it's nice just that I'm the director and producer, and it's my thing. That's what this album has been. But it's not the first time, but I have been busier with work in this phase of my life, so it was good to carve out time to make more music for me again, you know. And so yeah, it's kind of what the album is. And I realized I tied up certain emotions in some of the pieces I'd written. Some of them really are about very specific things, you know, the actual moment my mum died, or childhood, difficult stuff with childhood with my mum and things like that. And I guess I only heightened that in the arrangement process, and, you know, added various musical things that heighten the emotions I was feeling, or so on. So it's quite tricky to talk about, because music is so subjective, and I think people will hear what I've written and not necessarily hear the very non-abstract things that I've put into the music. For me, I hear very specific subjective things, but someone else might hear something very different. But that's fine, because I think that's what, you know, most art does, really. Or a lot of art I like is pretty subjective. There are different interpretations and different ways of looking at it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And it must have felt different, as you said, to be the, you know, director, producer, creator, to fill all of those roles, rather than have, you know, an assignment handed to you of, here's the story and here's what we're thinking, write the music. like you had the story, that the story was yours, the inspiration was yours, that must have felt obviously so much more personal, but I would imagine your sense of ownership over the actual music must have a different weight for you.
Yeah, in every sense. Yes, it does. And it's almost like I think of it as a photo album or something. I can listen to the music again, not that I do right now at all because it's relatively recent, but I know I'll listen to it in a few years and I'll be right back in the scenarios that either the time of my mum's death or the childhood stuff that I'm unknitting in some of the tracks. If I may borrow a Harry Potter reference, it's almost like I've created these 10 Horcruxes, sort of knitted a bit of myself into these things,
Yeah.
But maybe I'm the only person who can actually figure out what they are, but they make sense to somebody else in a different way. It's still hopefully a nice thing to look at for someone else, even if it doesn't function as a Horcrux for someone else. If you get what I mean.
I love that. That's the first Harry Potter connection that I've had with these interviews. So bravo.
The first of many.
Yeah, first. That's right. This is going to kick off a whole series of them. The track that I really connected with personally was "No to No No More."
Sure.
It was really very, very easy to listen to and get into and kind of just absorb. And it wasn't until I was a couple minutes into it that I said, what is the time signature here? And that doesn't happen to me that often. I'm usually pretty attuned to when there are asymmetrical time signatures. So is it 13/8, 13/16?
Yes.
13/8.
Definitely 13/8, I think, yeah.
Okay.
It's subjective, but I mean,
Sure.
you could do lots of ways. So it could be 7 and 6, couldn't it? Or 4-3-3-3, probably. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1. God, it's so hard to count and play. Isn't it? 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. This kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, again, it's a bit like Ascension Bells. A lot of the pieces are in pairs and they are next to their partner. So Ascension Bells is track 1. This is track 2. It's got the same kind of polyrhythmic vibe. And though it's 13, because it's very close to 12, it's kind of, it could be, I won't be able to play. I've played this so many times, it would be hard to play it in 12, but 1 2 3 1 2 3 it could be. And it'd be much more mundane, but it's just it's almost like a kind of swing. It's like it's almost a form of swing, but just a bit more complex than your normal, just 2 beats and one is slightly more stressed. There's 4 beats and the first one is slightly longer. Da 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 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Well, what I really like about that, though, is when I hear pieces like that where there's one beat that's slightly longer, it often seems to me like a hesitation. But that's not what this comes across to me as. This is an easy flow from group to group. It doesn't feel like there's a halter in the step, or it's so. I don't know. I listened to that a few times. I went, wait a minute, why am I not trying to, why am I not thrown off kilter?
And there's extra, I think part of it is the extra layers on top, the string lines, which are playing slightly different emphasized rhythms. Often the sort of 6 grouping at the end, if it's 7 then 6, there's often there's the standard hemiola I Want to Be in America, the one everyone knows.
Sure.
So the two dotted crotchets at the end become three quavers or this kind of thing. There's a lot of that rhythm and other rhythms of that sort in there. So I think a lot of the time composers who use a time signature like 13, the composition just really feels like it's in 13 and they've done a very 13-y thing and it's the same every, you know, to me it feels very square. If it was in 4/4 it really would be, it's kind of terrible. It's just the fact it's in 13 that makes it have anything. Whereas I think if you're going to do a time signature, it has to still have the interest you'd put in rhythmically to a piece in 4/4. So you have to have the same rhythmic color, if you like. It's not always the same emphasis. You're not always just whacking out the 4/3/3/3.
Yeah.
Because that just feels like we're all counting together. It's just
Exactly.
like Sesame Street or something.
So, right. Who are some of your favorite composers?
Quite a number. Classical wise, very much with a small c. It tends to be when the harmony gets what I would say more interesting, but before it collapses entirely. So I really love Debussy, Ravel, Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky, Fauré, you know, that chunk. And then when it just I never have understood 12 tone, unfortunately. Not that I would slag it off, but I just, it doesn't communicate with me. The thing which I most like about music, possibly more than anything, is tension and release and harmony. And that's exactly what 12 tone is trying to do away with. So I don't get it on that basis, because it kind of gets rid of the one of the main sort of structural pillars that makes music make sense to me. Yeah, classically all that stuff, but after that, just all sorts. Loads of crazy heavy rock bands, lots of 70s prog, which I've said, alternative rock. Radiohead was important when I was a kid. Bjork is just brilliant, especially the earlier stuff. She is a very key influence to all the genres I've written in. You know, just the way she uses modes and harmony is really key for me. So yeah, all sorts, to be honest, in all genres.
If people want to find out more about you and get access to your album, where can they go?
People may well have already heard this, but the place to get an album, if you actually like a composer or a band, is Bandcamp. You can't always release your album on Bandcamp, because if you sign a contract with, you know, Sony, as I have on occasion, you can't just release something on Bandcamp. But this album is totally my own to release, and so yeah, if you want to support an artist, you buy their album on Bandcamp, and they get a big chunk of that money. And if I just get the kind of encouragement to make another one, for that, I'm getting that from just seeing some money come in, you know. Whereas if it gets streamed on Spotify a million times, I get, you know, 20 quid. It's more than that,
Right.
but not much more. So yeah, if you go to my Bandcamp page, and anybody who wants to can find me. I'm lucky that I've got a weird name, Rael Jones. That handle gets you to the usual Instagram, Twittery, Facebooky places. And yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, then do, obviously.
That page again to find Rael's album, Mother Echo, is raeljones.bandcamp.com. That's Rael Jones. And we'll put a link on our show page. And that's our show for today. My deepest thanks to Rael Jones, and congratulations on your album release. Our theme music is by Not Dead composer Thomas Barber. Check him out at thomasbarber.com. Web development support is provided by Tina at citybeautifuldesign.com. Keep Classical Weird is created and edited by me, Casey Bozell. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, and feel free to tweet at me with the hashtag #KeepClassicalWeird. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Stay safe and stay weird.